You sent the text, you saw the delivered receipt, and then nothing. No response, no typing bubble, just silence on the other end, while the person you texted went on living their life like your message never existed. Most people assume it means one thing. They didn't care enough to respond. But psychologists who study digital communication have found something that completely flips that assumption. The people who leave text on read are not always indifferent. In many cases, they're experiencing something far more complicated than you ever realized. And once you understand what is actually driving that behavior, you will never interpret an unanswered message the same way again. There are 6 distinct psychological profiles behind this behavior. Each one operates from a completely different internal world. By the time we get through all of them, you will recognize people in your life you never fully understood before, and you might even recognize yourself. Let us start with the one that surprises people most. The first profile is what researchers call the emotional regulator. These are people who read your message, feel something strong in response, and then go completely quiet. Not because they do not care, because they care too much. Here is how their internal experience actually works. When a message carries emotional weight, whether it is a conflict, a request, a vulnerable confession, or even just an unexpected plan change, their nervous system responds intensely. They feel the pressure of the conversation the moment they open it. And the only tool they have learned to use is distance. Psychologist James Gross at Stanford, who has spent decades studying emotional regulation strategies, distinguishes between 2 broad approaches people use to manage difficult feelings: reappraisal, where you mentally reframe the situation, and suppression, where you push the emotion down and disengage. People who consistently go silent when messages feel heavy are almost always defaulters to the second strategy. They suppress by removing themselves from the source of the feeling entirely. And here is the detail that changes everything. Many of them have no conscious awareness they are even doing it. They open the message, feel the internal spike, close the app, and tell themselves they will reply later when they feel ready. Later never comes. Not because the feeling resolved, but because returning to the conversation means re-entering the emotional state they were trying to escape. Studies on avoidant attachment, a pattern first mapped by developmental psychologist Mary Ainsworth, and later extended into adult relationships by researchers like Kim Bartholomew, consistently show that avoidantly attached individuals use distancing behaviors during emotional closeness as a way to self-regulate. Digital silence is the modern version of that ancient pattern. The person across the screen is not rejecting you. They are managing a feeling they were never taught to sit with. That matters, because what looks like coldness from the outside is actually anxiety from the inside. The second profile operates from a completely different place, but produces the same result. These are the overthinkers. And what is happening in their heads when they leave a text on read would genuinely shock you. You sent a message. Simple, direct. Maybe a question, maybe a plan, maybe something casual. On your end, it took 15 seconds to write. On their end, it triggers something closer to a full strategic analysis. They read your message, they draft a response in their head. Then they immediately start evaluating that response. Is this too much? Too little? Will this come across wrong? Am I being too eager? Too distant? Does this response match the energy they used? Should I wait longer so I do not seem desperate? If they sent a short message, should I send a short one back, or will that seem cold? By the time they have cycled through enough of those questions, the window of easy response is closed. Now there is the added pressure of the delay itself. Why did I take so long? Now, any response I send will need to acknowledge the wait, or it will seem weird. But acknowledging the wait might seem dramatic, so maybe I should just pretend no time passed. But that also seems off. This is what psychologists refer to as meta-worry, anxiety about the anxiety itself. The fear of responding incorrectly produces paralysis, and the paralysis creates the exact outcome they were trying to avoid in the first place. Research published in the journal Computers and Human Behavior has documented that individuals with higher social anxiety report significantly more distress around messaging response times, both the time they wait for others and the time they take themselves. The medium that was supposed to remove social pressure by giving people time to think has, for a significant portion of the population, simply relocated the anxiety into the waiting period. These people desperately want to respond. The message has been living in their head rent-free. They have mentally composed and deleted 12 versions of a reply. They are fully aware of the time passing. That awareness is not apathy. It is its own form of suffering. And then there is a third profile that most conversations on this topic completely miss. These are the priority architects. And to understand them, you have to understand how a certain kind of mind organizes its entire existence. For some people, life is running at a constant state of maximum cognitive load. Not by choice, by design. They have structured their attention deliberately, almost obsessively, so that it goes toward the things they have deemed most important. Career, a creative project, a physical discipline, a business they are building. Everything else, including social availability, sits in a secondary queue. When a message comes in from someone they care about, they clock it, they note it. They may even feel warmth toward the sender in that moment. And then they consciously or semi-consciously file it under things to address when the high priority bandwidth becomes available. That moment often comes much later than the sender expected. Sometimes it does not come that same day at all. The important distinction here is that this behavior is not a reflection of the relationship's value. It is a reflection of how they relate to attention itself. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, whose decades of research on deep focus and the state of flow became the foundation of an entire branch of performance psychology, documented extensively that people capable of sustained, immersive focus often experience social interruptions as genuinely disruptive to their cognitive state. For them, leaving a message unread until a natural break in focus is not rudeness. It is a preservation strategy. This profile is particularly common in people who operate in high-output professional environments, artists and builders in active creative phases, and people who grew up in households where distraction was treated as failure. They are not ignoring you. They are inside something, and they will surface when they come up for air. The difficulty is that the person waiting for the response has no way of seeing that. From the outside, it looks identical to every other silence. Now let us talk about the profile that is hardest to be honest about, because it involves something most people do not want to admit they do. The fourth profile is the power dynamic player. And unlike the previous three, this one is at least partially intentional. Research in social exchange theory, a framework developed in the mid-20th century and built upon by sociologists like Peter Blau, describes human relationships through the lens of resources, perceived value, and leverage. One of the most consistent findings from that framework is that the person who appears less invested in an interaction tends to hold more social power within it. And a significant number of people have internalized that principle, either consciously or through pattern learning, and apply it through their texting behavior. The delay is not always about what they are feeling. Sometimes it is about what they want you to feel. A calibrated wait communicates scarcity. It says, my time and attention are valuable, and you are not automatically entitled to either. In romantic contexts especially, strategic delayed responses have been studied as a tool of perceived desirability, a manufactured version of the psychological principle of intermittent reinforcement. Here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Intermittent reinforcement, the pattern of unpredictable and inconsistent reward, is one of the most powerful behavioral conditioning mechanisms known to psychology. It is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. When someone responds quickly sometimes and goes completely silent other times, the person waiting does not become indifferent to the silence. They become more preoccupied. The uncertainty amplifies the attention. Some people who use delayed responses this way are fully aware of the effect they are creating. Others learned it by watching it work, absorbed the lesson without consciously registering it, and now deploy it automatically. Both are operating from the same place, a belief that being less reachable makes them more wanted. And they are not entirely wrong. That is the uncomfortable part. But there is a fifth profile that sits on the opposite end of the emotional spectrum from power playing and it is the one that carries the most weight. These are the people who are drowning. When someone is inside a depressive episode, a period of severe anxiety, grief that has not lifted, burnout that has reached the point of functional shutdown, or a crisis they have not named to anyone yet, their communication patterns collapse inward. Messages pile up, the notifications accumulate. The idea of responding to anything, even something simple, even from someone they love, feels like trying to lift something enormously heavy in a room with no air. Clinical psychologist and researcher Jonathan Rottenberg, whose work on the motivational framework of depression remains among the most cited in the field, describes one of depression's core features as the collapse of approach, motivation, the internal drive to move toward things, including connection, response, and engagement. A person in that state is not choosing silence as a preference. They are experiencing silence as the only state their system can sustain. What makes this profile particularly difficult is that the silence often targets the relationships the person values most. The people closest to them are the ones they most struggle to contact, because authenticity with those people would require acknowledging how badly they are actually doing, and they are not ready to do that. Or they cannot find the words, or they are afraid of what answering honestly might open. So the text sits there, read, unanswered, and the person on the other end, who has no context for any of this, interprets the silence as distance when it is actually the opposite. It is the sound of someone struggling in ways they have not been able to say out loud. The sixth and final profile is the one that will reframe how you think about digital communication entirely. These are the boundary builders, and what they are actually protecting is not what most people assume. There is a generation of people, increasingly documented in research on digital well-being and technoference, the intrusion of technology into interpersonal life, who have made a deliberate decision about how they relate to constant connectivity. They have experienced firsthand what it feels like to have your attention permanently available to everyone who has your phone number, the low-grade anxiety of always monitoring notifications, the resentment of being expected to respond immediately regardless of what else is happening, the erosion of presence in their own life because they are perpetually managing other people's access to them. Their silence is not relational, it is structural. They have decided consciously that responding on demand does not serve their mental health or their ability to show up well in their actual life. They respond when they are ready, on a timeline that preserves their sense of agency, and they have made peace with the fact that not everyone will understand that. Psychologist Nancy Baim, in her research on social norms and digital communication, has noted that expectations around response time have become one of the most significant sources of interpersonal friction in the modern era, largely because those expectations were never explicitly agreed upon. They were assumed. The person who leaves text on read is often operating from a different set of assumed norms than the person waiting. Neither person is wrong by some objective standard. They are just running different software. What all 6 of these profiles share is this: the silence is not empty. Every unanswered message exists inside some larger internal context that the sender almost never has access to. Avoidance, anxiety, focus, calculation, suffering, deliberate self-protection. None of those realities are visible from the outside. All of them look identical. That is the real psychology behind being left on read. It is almost never actually about you. It is almost always about something the other person is navigating inside a world you cannot see, which means the next time a message you sent disappears into silence, you have a choice. You can fill that silence with the story that feels most intuitive, that you are being dismissed, undervalued, or forgotten. Or you can hold the possibility that somewhere on the other side of that screen, someone is working through something complicated in the only way they currently know how. That does not mean the silence does not hurt. It does. It means the silence might mean something completely different than what you assumed, and that difference is worth knowing.